Probably not since the 1960s have we seen this level of division, and especially when it comes to the presidency. I mean, now we literally have Democrats who are consistently saying that President Trump is an authoritarian who is shredding the Constitution, constantly violating it. In fact, we can go back to December of 2019 when Nancy Pelosi, and we have this in Cut 8, when Nancy Pelosi said that she was proceeding with articles of impeachment against President Donald J. Trump. Let's go ahead and roll Cut 8, please, Mr. Matoush.
The president's actions have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when he says and acts upon the belief. Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. No, his wrongdoing strikes at the very heart of our Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches, each a check and balance on the other. A republic, if we can keep it, said Benjamin Franklin. Our democracy is what is at stake. The president leaves us no choice but to act because he is trying to corrupt, once again, the election for his own benefit.
Now, those words from Nancy Pelosi are the very first quote in the book authored by our next John guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Professor John Yoo is the Emanuel S. Heller Professor of Law at Berkeley Law, UCLA Berkeley, and is co-faculty director of the Korea Law Center and director of Public Law and Policy Program there, and also author of the new book, Defender-in-Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power. And Professor Yoo joins us now here on the program. Welcome to the show, sir. It's good to have you.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Again, we're talking with John Yoo, who is professor of law at Berkeley Law, and he's author of the brand new book. Let's put it up on the screen again. Defender-in-Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power. And I want to play another clip, but then we're going to get to some specific elements of the Trump presidency that you discuss in your book, Defender-in-Chief, Professor Yoo. I want to get to Cut 7 here. This is Mehdi Hasan over on MSNBC, and he was talking this week about how we have to start using the word fascism in describing the administration of President Trump. Let's take a look at this.
I've worked around the globe. I've interviewed prime ministers and government officials, dictators, despots, authoritarians. And I think it's time in America that we finally have a proper conversation about the F word. No, not that one. Fascism. I know, it's really controversial. People get very uncomfortable when you mention it. But to borrow a line, if not now, when? And if not us, the free press, then who? For far too long, we have shied away from saying the F word. For a lot of people, calling Donald Trump a fascist was just ad hominem, a lazy political insult. It was the liberal who cried wolf. And yet, look what happened the moment he took office. There was the Muslim ban, and the very fine people in Charlottesville, and then the kids he threw into cages and camps. But it's not stopped. Those were not isolated incidents. Just last month, the president had protesters, as well as reporters, outside the White House, tear-gassed and beaten, so that he could go for a stroll and have a photo op holding a Bible outside a nearby church. And we were told not to call that
Mehdi Hasan essentially saying there, he's saying it's time to talk about the word fascism when it comes to President Trump. No more setting that aside. He lists the Muslim ban and Charlottesville comments and kids in cages and gassing protesters outside the White House so that he can get a photo op. This is the narrative that is being presented about President Trump right now, is that he is a fascist and that he is doing whatever he can to become an increasingly authoritarian figure. In this moment, especially, Professor John Yoo, how do you view those ideas coming from the left that President Trump is a fascist and he's just trying to become a wannabe dictator to the point of becoming a dictator in full?
Yeah, sadly, this is yet another example of the dynamic I'm talking about in the book about how the left is the one that's gone to such extremes because of their hatred of Donald Trump that they're using the most outrageous language, that they're the ones who are really trying to upend the constitutional order. So take, for example, just the one that you were showing about the rioting in our cities. The president and the federal government have had an authority to protect federal buildings, personnel. Right? They have the authority to enforce federal law, whether that's the drug laws, the gun laws, interstate conspiracies. They even have the right to protect the civil rights of the people that maybe the city mayors aren't protecting, who are living there in fear of violence. This is not some power Donald Trump made up. This is a power that President Washington used at the very beginning. This is, remember the claim that President Lincoln made at the start of the Civil War. That's all he was doing with Fort Sumter, he said. And it's the people who are claiming this is an occupying army or this is fascism. They're the ones who I think are responsible for the extreme nature and polarization of our political debate today. I find it irresponsible.
Yeah, I think that throwing around words like fascism, he was making it seem like we've finally reached the moment where fascism is a necessary term for us to use. I mean, that's the mentality here that they're trying to present. But fundamentally, what we're talking about here is across the country, and what President Trump is responding to is the loss of individual liberty by thugs who are rampaging in these cities, in city after city after city. I mean, I'm here broadcasting from Aurora, Colorado. Denver and Aurora, Colorado are now in the thick of this with violence of our own. Of course, Seattle and Portland are hot button locations that people are focusing on. But what you have in these cities is a failure of local governments and state governments to protect individual liberty, property rights, to protect the safety of the people in those locations. And what President Trump isn't doing, though, is just taking on the authority of enforcing all of these laws in local communities. He is particularly trying to protect federal property and even getting intense pushback from that. And yet, he's the one person in some of these cities who's actually trying to enforce the law to the extent he can.
Yeah, in fact, one thing I think would have surprised the founders, the idea that a city or a state refuses to maintain public safety, refuses to maintain public health. Under the Constitution, cities and localities have the primary responsibility for policing, for safety and health. I don't think the founders could have imagined what we're seeing in Portland and Seattle and some of our other cities where the mayors just say they refuse to do it. In fact, I thought I saw the mayor of Portland was one of the protesters who was protesting in front of the federal courthouse. In those kinds of situations, then the federal government has to step in. The federal government has not just to protect its own facilities and not just to enforce federal law, criminal laws, but they're the constitutional rights of the people who live there. And if the city and states default on their responsibility to protect those lives and property, then there is a role for the federal government to do that instead in the most extreme situations.
Let's talk for a moment about Attorney General Bill Barr. He was testifying this week before Congress once again. This time he was being grilled by the House of Representatives for his defense of President Trump's policies and actions, and particularly in dealing with the riot crisis that we have spreading across the country. And basically, you have a lot of people, Professor John Yoo, who are saying that Attorney General Barr is just doing President Trump's dirty work. In essence, he's not abiding by the law or caring about the law. He's just trying to do whatever President Trump feels he needs, almost like a personal lawyer for the president. How do you assess the role that Attorney General Bill Barr has taken upon himself in this Trump administration and his relationship with President Trump vis-a-vis this important topic of your book on the presidency and its role?
I think Bill Barr's been the most valuable player in this cabinet. I mean, he's done a remarkable job. And what he's trying to do, again, as part of this bigger understanding of the Trump presidency I set forth in my book, is they are trying to restore elected democratic control over the great bureaucracy in charge of law enforcement. He is trying to get to the bottom of the Russia collusion investigation, because what that represented, I think he's quite right when he describes it this way, what that represented was this group of unaccountable officials, Jim Comey on who knows who else involved, who thought that they could use the powers of the government to deny the results of the 2016 election, to do extraordinary things like spy on the campaign of a major political party for president, and to continue doing it after that person won the election and was president. And the problem, the real constitutional threat in all this is that we're going to have some kind of bodies and government that are not accountable to the people, not accountable to the people we send to Washington, whom we elect, who think that they have the power to decide who gets to hold office and who gets to exercise power on our behalf. That is not that is not the system the founders wanted. And I think Barr is doing a really good job taking a lot of arrows in that effort to restore that political elected control over our government.